Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Drupa DNA stage. I'm happy to announce Kerry Sanders from EFI being now on stage up next.
Frank?
I saw the Nozomi name this morning already on the Drupa Daily, so I'm sure there's a lot coming out of EFI this show, and in particular your presentation here about the environmental impact will be a very interesting one.
Yep.
So give a hand to Kerry Sanders. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, Frank, for that warm introduction. Hello, as mentioned, Kerry Sanders from EFI. I'm the Vice President of Market Development, meaning that we, during the daytime hours, our day job, go and interact directly with brands and retailers and 3PLs and talk with them about the value proposition on our digital printing presses for corrugated material. Okay, that's a mouthful, but we print directly onto corrugated boards, and those boards then are converted into boxes or freestanding display unit. Okay, it's a digital printing process, so no plates are involved, and these are very high-speed presses, so it's an industrial application. So as we all know, in packaging, there is a growing need for the packaging provider, the converter, or the brand that's actually providing packaging as a part of their product, to think about it as a sustainability impact or a risk to the planet, if you will. And so a number of these legislative authorities, local legislative authorities, are putting in place what's called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Laws. And then that's kicked off a whole subsequent work activity load from all of their suppliers to figure out what exactly is the environmental impact of the products that I'm supplying. And so to help our corrugated converter partners, we conducted a recent LCA, life cycle assessment, on digital printing on corrugated. And so I'm here today over the next 30 minutes to share with you the process that we followed and then the results. And part of those results is we commissioned a comparative LCA, so that not only are we looking at our impact, but then we're comparing it to other print technologies to see if there's a delta. Because if there is, then I think it all behooves us as a packaging and printing industry to take that very seriously, because then we could be avoiding some carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, essentially. Okay? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Because what I have found in talking about LCAs in the industry, there's various levels of understanding. I thought not to insult anybody, but I'd start at a very basic level first and then build from that. So if you haven't heard of an LCA before, as mentioned, it's called a life cycle assessment, and it essentially takes into consideration the whole life cycle of a product as it enters into use and out of use for recycling. So if you start on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see sourcing, manufacturing, distribution, use, end of life. It's a 360 view of what it takes to get this product, this thing, into use, into the marketplace, okay? And the reason why these LCAs have become so important is it is trying to get down to one number, kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions, related to the life cycle of that product, okay, related to the life cycle of that material. And so you take into consideration everything required to take a raw material, convert that into a finished good, distribute that finished good out into the marketplace, that finished good being consumed, right, its lifetime, and then that finished good hopefully being recycled and put back in as a raw material, okay? So that's what a life cycle assessment is. Ultimately, when you hear people refer to GWP, global warming potential, that is the acronym related to LCAs that are then measuring, as I mentioned, kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. That's a mouthful, okay? There's standards that we used as a part of our engagement, and there's standards for LCA so that everybody believes the results. And quite frankly, what's happening is so many of these LCAs are taking place that there's large databases that are now being able to be leveraged. If you need to tap into that database to understand what the LCA is for one of the components in your manufacturing process, that database now exists. that you can actually use that database to get to that number for, let's say, the I don't know, the screw or the bolt or whatever, or the gasket, okay? So this is because everybody takes this so seriously, it's a growing trend, we're starting to get really good data compiled. So at EFI, we consider ourselves the leader in digital print on corrugated just by market share, right? We have over 60 of our digital printing presses out on the market today around the world, and we have millions and millions of square meters of volume going through these presses, and so we felt like it was, it was our responsibility to understand exactly what that impact was. So we commissioned an agency called the Clean Agency. This is an agency based in the United States. They specialize in LCA development, and they've had several engagements with packaging companies as well as printing companies. So we felt like based on their baseline of knowledge and their interactions with other companies and their process, that they would be the agency of choice. We actually tendered, I think, 5 different agencies for this, and we ended up choosing the Clean Agency. We gave them 3 objectives. One, we wanted to quantify and substantiate what the GWP is for a Nozomi print job, right? What the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions are for our print jobs. But we also wanted to understand what the energy consumption was, what the water consumption was, as well as the waste produced. So we commissioned them to go and find that information for us. We provided a bunch of data. They used their model to, for that calculation, and I'll show you what the results are in coming slides. The second thing that we wanted to do is, because we're going to build a model, we wanted to be able to leverage that model on behalf of our customers, which are converters, right? So they can use a calculator. They could type in, the amount of square meters in a job, and this calculator, based on the region of the world that they're in, will actually give them the GWP, the water, the energy consumption, and the waste, so that they can use that in reporting, right? Because their brands that they're supporting might want to know that information, or they can use that in understanding what their contribution was, right? What their global warming potential was. So that was the second objective. Third objective is, and this is called comparative LCA. Not only do we want to understand our data, we wanted to understand other printing technology data so that in the calculator we can make a comparison very easily, okay? So good news is they did their job. Sorry, this is a bad graphic through, but essentially what they came back and recommended to us was in product management lifecycle LCAs, there's 3 approaches. You could go cradle to cradle. That's literally 360, and then going back into raw materials as you take your finished goods and recycle them, okay? You can go cradle to gate, which that's 360, raw materials through to recycling. And then, I'm sorry, that was cradle to grave, and then cradle to gate. I know this is complicated, but cradle to gate just means one process within that 360 degrees. And what they recommended to EFI is, because we're in the printing process of the overall packaging LCA, that we should really focus on cradle to gate, and that's what we did. So we focused on that. 3 categories within that: raw material supply, so that's ink for us in the printing process, as well as coatings, as well as some of the maintenance items that are consumed during the printing process, okay? Transport to factory, what that means for us, in addition to getting those raw materials into finished goods, once they're finished goods, transporting those to wherever our Nozomi presses are installed, right? So for instance, we have a plant in Michigan that manufactures our inks, so it supplies everyone in North America. Similarly, we have a plant in Spain that supplies everyone in Western Europe. So when we're calculating the emissions on transportation, we're taking those manufacturing hubs into consideration. And then finally, manufacturing in this model just means printing. When one of our converters is using our platform, our inks, our coatings, and they're printing a job, there are emissions because there's energy consumption in the operation of the press. So we calculated all of that, okay? So I made the first point already about the raw materials, what it includes. It includes ink, pre and post coats, and then parts related to maintenance. The transport takes into consideration the different locations of where we're supplying these supply items. And then manufacturing refers to the printing area, there's different power generation technologies around the world. They have different profiles for emissions. And so we loaded into this model 48 different countries. And then in the US, 9 different regions, and Canada has 13 different regions. So in the calculator, when you go in, you can actually choose the country and the region to try to get it the best and most accurate output, okay? So cradle to gate, those 3 components, and we have those considerations in the model. So what we did to get to our number is we provided 1 year of data to the clean agency. 1 year of manufacturing data, 1 year of transportation data, 1 year of press operation data in this spreadsheet that it was complex. But they have a model that then they can intake that data and then they can help you get to your number. For the comparative LCA, and I mentioned this in the opening, there is this ever-growing database called Echo Invent, and it has different release numbers. So I think the latest is 4.0 or 4.1. We use 3.9, and essentially you can go in and look at flexoprinting, lithoprinting, digital preprint, and you can get to a global warming potential number based on that database. And so they helped us with the comparative database through that. And then they used these different sources and research studies and papers like from DuPont and HP to kind of triangulate that data to make sure that it made sense, okay? And then finally, we got this independently verified. So Clean Agency is independent from EFI. They did the work. It's their model. They suggested that we get an independent verifier to come in and take a look at the process and the findings. We did, and the good news is just 2 weeks ago, it passed independent verification. There were minor modifications required, and they were more aesthetic, like how you're showing the data, okay? So that's all the setup to share with you what we actually found. So here's our findings. So for digital printing, when you're thinking about the printing process and the overall LCA of packaging, it's about 10% of the contribution, or 10% of the emissions, okay? So it's not, because you have, the trees, the transport of trees, in the making of pulp, and pulp, being converted into a substrate, and a substrate being converted into a package, that's a big process. Printing is 10% of that whole process. So it's meaningful, but it's not, it's not the majority. So just keep that in mind. What we found for digital print on an EFI Nozomi press is for every 100 square meters of print, there are 8.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. That's our number. And that's the number that we're sharing with the industry because of the work that we did. That number was based on EFI data and the Clean Agency's interpretation of that data, which has been now independently certified, okay? So for every 100 square meters of digital print directly onto corrugated board on an EFI press, there's roughly 9 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions, okay? So that's the number. Now, interestingly, when we asked them to build the comparative LCA, this is what they came up with. Across the 48 different countries, the different regions in North America, on average, if you use digital printing technology, there is a greater than 50% reduction in emissions, carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, greater than 50% reduction. That's a big number, okay? And I'll tell you why in a minute. Similarly, there is a greater than 30% reduction in energy consumption. By the way, our digital printers, they don't use heat to cure the ink onto the board. They use a UV lamp. So there's no big heating element that's just draining electricity all day long. So it makes it very efficient. There's greater than 40% reduction in water consumption. And then depending on the converter's workflow, there's a significant reduction in waste because our make-ready pre-press process is very efficient. You don't have to run 10% of the job in order to get plates aligned. You just don't have to do that with digital. So there's significant impacts to the environment that we found based on digital printing. Okay, so you might be asking why. Well, the primary reason for the delta is printing plates. With digital, you completely eliminate the need to source, manufacture, transport, use, wash, store, recycle plates. That entire life cycle is eliminated from your overall LCA. That entire workflow, that entire thing. So that's the primary difference. We looked at litho, and in litho, because some of the plates, it could be as high as like 35% of the overall. So it's a significant reason. The second one was actually the way the inks are manufactured, that there was less emissions. And then the third one was press operation, that there was less energy used during the press operation. So if you combine those three, and there was others, but they were smaller, those are the biggest ones for the reason why we have such a delta here. So we feel good about this number. And we're willing to work with our converters. When you share this number with them, they say, yeah, okay, let's test it with our data. And so we're working with our converters right now to actually take a look at their data, comparative data on their flexo or their litho presses, okay? Here's an example of the calculator. I chose Germany, because of where we are. This is based on a 5 million square meter job. You can see all of the different values, raw materials, transport, and manufacturing, and that all adds up to this magic number here. That's the GWP. The total energy, the total water, and the total waste is on the right-hand side. And again, the comparative number is down here. This is based on that Echo Invent database, and here's a blow-up of that. Okay, so to read this for the GWP comparison versus flexo, if you had taken that 5 million square meters and run it on a flexo press, the printing piece alone would have been 53% higher in carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. That's how that reads. And the absolute value number is 473,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. The same for energy consumption, the same for water consumption, okay? Now, why is this important? So you've all read these very public and very aggressive net zero commitments from the largest brands and retailers and manufacturers out there. So what they mean is net zero is emissions. That's what they're talking about. So they, scope 1 emissions are all the emissions from their operations. So that, the things that they control, okay? Scope 2 emissions is everything that their energy producer, their power producer is emitting, right? So they somewhat control that. And then scope 3 emissions is their supply chain. So packaging is directly in scope 3 emissions. And a lot of these brands and retailers are doing great work on scope 1. They've done great work on scope 2. And now they're turning, their eye on scope 3 to go to all of their suppliers and say, you have a target to reduce this amount. And by the way, you need to report on that. So if you don't have the data, you're in trouble, because how are you going to come up with the data? So when we were generating this LCA, our intent was to not only help the converter, but help the converter help the brand or the retailer when it came to scope 3 emissions. So that's what we're doing, okay? So as an example, Caps Cases is one of our converters in the UK. They were public in our press release, and so I can mention them. They did their work, and they looked at the volume that they had run, and they estimated through our calculator that they saved over 300,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. And in fact, their largest customer was about 20% of their volume saved 60. So it's a big deal. They can now go back to that brand and say, hey, just from converting that from this printing technology to digital, you can capture that GWP reduction, and then you can report that as your overall initiative, which is significant, okay? And then the only other thing that I wanted to share with you today, we just announced a partnership with Pack Size. I don't know if any of you have any engagement with Pack Size already or understand this marketplace, but it's right size packaging. It's packaging on demand. So the package, the corrugated package, is actually manufactured to fit whatever it needs to ship. So it reduces all the overpack. It reduces the extra packaging. And so if you have something that's small, it'll build a small box. If you have something that's big, it'll build a big box. So what we did is we partnered with Pack Size to include our digital press right in the middle of their right size packaging. So you can have variable different sizes of packaging going through the press. Every package can be branded or decorated differently, and it exits the press as a fully erected box. Hall 9 is where we're showing this right now. And so if you want to see something very cool, you're getting up to 600 erected, fully custom-sized, fully custom brand boxes coming out of this solution. So why do I bring that up here? Because we're talking about sustainability. Right-size packaging has a huge benefit because you're eliminating so much waste. Now you add digital printing to that LCA already, or that footprint already. It's a winning combination. So we feel very excited about that, and I would invite you to go and take a look at it. Okay? So I think that's it. This is where we're at, Hall 9, A20 and 21. If you just literally go through there and then take a right and you get into Hall 9, you'll see the EFI booth. It's massive. Those are my details. I would love to talk to anybody about this. Our goal is obviously we want to position EFI well, but we also want to position packaging well. And so, I'll collaborate with anybody in the packaging and printing space on this. Okay? So, questions, or are we out of time?
They're kind of new. I actually learned about them from Carbon Quota, which is an exhibitor here. Are you tracking that at the moment?
Well, trying to. So there's a couple of things going on. So there's PPWR, that's getting rid of plastics, right? So that's a lot of where this legislative effort is taking place. But then there's also EPR. So EPR means extended producer responsibility, and so essentially what they're saying with this legislation is the producer, which is the brand, is responsible for paying for the recycling of the packaging that they're putting into the marketplace. So they negotiate with, usually an intermediary, where then they pay the local governments for the recycling, or the local entities, whether they be private or public. EPR is, I think, been in Germany for years now. It's in other countries now. And it's going to the United States. So it's a big deal for packaging, right? Because now you have to build that cost, right, as a brand into your cost of goods sold, right, into your COGS, because you're thinking about paying for the recycling of your product. Yeah. That's right. That's right. And we're starting to see that. So hearing from the converters, when they respond to a tender, they're just now starting to, there's the financial piece, there's the capabilities piece, there's the risk piece, now there's a sustainability area. And now that we're providing them this data, then they can, in that sustainability area, talk about that specific volume or application, and then give them this calculation. So yeah, we're seeing more and more of that.
Perfect.
All right.
Kerry, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.
And see you all back at 2 o'clock to listen to Callis. Yeah, exactly. And as Kerry said, EFI, Hall 9, have a look at the new Nozomi. Thank you.